Contra on the NES is an adrenaline-pumping ride that defined an entire generation of run-and-gun shooters. When people think of the 80s era of gaming, big hair, arcade cabinets, that signature Konami jingle, Contra inevitably pops into the conversation. Grab your spread gun and buckle up, because we're about to plunge into a deep exploration of this iconic 8-bit classic, its origins, its punishing difficulty, that fabled Konami Code, and why it continues to hold a place of honor in retro gamers' hearts. Contra started its life in the arcades in 1987. Konami wanted to capture the raw energy and over-the-top action of popular Hollywood movies, like Rambo and Predator. You have two muscle-bound heroes, Bill Reiser and Lance Bean, sprinting across jungles, snowy fortresses, and alien lairs as they gun down swarms of enemies. The arcade hit was successful enough that Konami chose to bring it to home consoles, specifically the Nintendo Entertainment System, where it arrived in 1988, North America, and 1990. The NES port would become one of those titles that everyone seemed to talk about, blending arcade intensity with couch co-op and some truly memorable set pieces. The basic story is pure 80s sci-fi action schlock in the best way. A meteor crashes in the Galuga archipelago, presumably carrying an alien entity. An evil organization has begun harnessing the alien's power, and it's up to two commandos, codenamed Mad Dog and Scorpion in some versions, Bill and Lance in others, to blast their way through wave after wave of grunts, turrets, and monstrous alien creatures. It's a paper-thin plot, but that never mattered to kids who just wanted to mow down baddies in co-op mode. For an NES game, the premise felt cool. You're basically reenacting your favorite action movie in pixel form. From the first stage, you can feel Contra's arcade pedigree. The screen scrolls from left to right, enemies pop out from every direction, and you have to keep moving or risk getting overwhelmed. There's no health bar. One bullet, one stray shot, and you're done. At least you respawn on the spot, which keeps the pace frantic, but your lost life also means losing whatever power-up you had. And oh, those power-ups, the heart and soul of Contra's gameplay. There's the standard P shooter, which is serviceable but weak. Then you have the machine gun, which lets you hold down the fire button for continuous shots, helpful for clearing out crowds. The laser is powerful but has a weirdly slow rate of fire. The fire, or flame, gun creates spiraling projectiles that can be devastating in close quarters. And of course, the holy grail of Contra power-ups. The spread gun fires a wide cone of bullets, allowing you to hit multiple enemies at once and essentially rule the screen. Most people who grew up playing Contra remember diving for that precious S icon the moment it appeared. Contra's hallmark was also its variety in level design. Most stages are side-scrolling run and gun, but early on you encounter the base levels, behind-the-back corridor runs where you blast walls, dodge security beams, and try to destroy a final barrier to advance. These 3D-esque segments looked mind-blowing on the NES for their time, and they offered a break from the traditional horizontal action. Later in the game, you get a vertical climb up a waterfall, as well as more intricate fortress stages featuring gun turrets, alien growths, and traps that test your reflexes. Each level ends with a boss fight, like a giant computer with glowing weak spots, or a monstrous alien head spitting out smaller creatures. One of the biggest draws for NES Contra was the two-player simultaneous co-op. Back in the late 80s, few action games allowed two players on the screen at once with this level of intensity. It was a glorious chaos. You and a friend jumping in tandem, trying not to accidentally push each other into a pit or a line of enemy fire. Everyone has that memory of fighting over power-ups. Someone inevitably steals the spread gun, leaving the other with a wimpy rifle. And there's that comedic tension of who's going to hog the extra lives. In a living room gaming session, it sometimes caused arguments, but more often it created an unbreakable bond. We're in this war together, and if one of us fails, we both do. Given that one hit means death, you had to stay sharp at all times, and it felt incredibly satisfying to clear a stage side by side. Of course, we can't discuss Contra on the NES without addressing the famous Konami Code. Up, down, left, right, B, A, start. This cheat had already shown up in Gradius, but Contra brought it to the mainstream, to the point that it became a cultural icon.
Anybody remember the Konami Code? Up, down, left, right, B, A, start. "30 lives."
Entering the Konami Code at the title screen grants you 30 lives instead of the standard 3. For many people, that's the difference between finishing Contra and never seeing past the first couple of stages. The game is notorious for its difficulty. No health bar, no mercy, so the Konami Code turned an impossible challenge into a manageable one. Yet even with 30 lives, you could still run out if you weren't careful. That just goes to show how relentless the game can be. Still, memorizing the Konami Code became a rite of passage. Playground rumors spread. Older siblings taught younger siblings, and before you knew it, the code was etched into the collective consciousness of an entire generation. Though the NES port was extremely popular in North America, it underwent changes for different regions. In Europe and PAL territories, the game was rebranded as Probotector. The human commandos were replaced with robots, and the enemy soldiers became mechanical foes, all to comply with stricter censorship rules that frowned upon depicting human-on-human violence. Meanwhile, the Japanese Famicom version of Contra included extra cutscenes and a slight storyline to flesh out the alien invasion angle, as well as unique visuals like a snowfield intro. The NES version we know in the West trimmed some of that content, but it kept the essence of the arcade game intact. Contra's aesthetic took heavy inspiration from popular science fiction and action films. Many backgrounds in the latter half of the game look suspiciously like H.R. Giger's Alien designs, with pulsating walls, egg sacs, and creepy biomechanical elements. As a kid, you might not notice the references, but as an adult, you realize just how many nods to Hollywood blockbusters are packed in. The game is basically a greatest hits compilation of 80s action tropes. A jungle infiltration, a high-tech fortress, a battle against alien monstrosities. It's a glorious mishmash, and Konami's sense of style and tight controls kept it from feeling like a cheap knockoff. Graphically, Contra pushed the NES in ways that felt dynamic and fluid. The backgrounds might be simple by modern standards, but everything is crisp, with bold colors that pop. Your character sprite is relatively large for an NES platformer, and the fluid running and jumping animations still feel good to control. The music, composed by Konami's in-house team, is another standout element, pumping adrenaline into every stage with catchy driving beats. If you talk to fans of retro games today, many will hum the jungle theme unprompted because it's that memorable, and let's not forget the satisfying sound effects. The distinctive rattle of the machine gun, the low-pitched explosion noise when a boss goes down, or that quick beep whenever you pick up a new weapon. All these little touches help define the game's identity. The difficulty level is famously high, even in a catalog of NES games known for punishing design. One bullet kills you outright, and enemies can snipe you from any angle. You have to learn every pattern, every spawn point, and watch your step constantly. There's a fairly short time limit too, though that rarely becomes an issue since the main threat is always the barrage of bullets and enemies. Boss fights require pinpoint accuracy. You typically have to dodge multiple projectiles while hammering away at the boss's core or glowing weak spot. If you didn't have the Konami Code, you relied on good old trial and error, muscle memory, and maybe a co-op partner who was just as determined as you were. Still, many players eventually mastered the game and could beat it on a single life, a feat that earned them instant respect in the schoolyard or among gaming friends. For me, a personal memory about Contra is how it was one of the few games my older cousin and I could play without sibling-level arguments because we needed each other to survive. When we first discovered the Konami Code, it felt like we had just cheated the entire system. Suddenly, we had 30 attempts at victory. If we lost them all by the halfway point, we'd reset the console and try again, gradually learning each stage. I remember the pure satisfaction we felt the first time we made it to the final alien lair. The walls pulsed with pinkish organs, weird shrimp-like aliens hopped around, and our hearts pounded in unison. It was genuinely tense, culminating in a final boss that looked like a giant beating heart. Shooting it while small xenomorph-like creatures sprang out felt both terrifying and exhilarating. When it finally exploded in a shower of pixels, we jumped off the couch screaming in victory. It was that perfect NES moment where beating a tough game felt like scaling a mountain. Another highlight is the sense of pacing. Contra hardly ever lets up. It starts you off in the jungle, tossing basic soldiers your way, letting you learn how to jump and shoot at diagonals. Then it quickly escalates to the base, which introduces the pseudo 3D perspective. By the time you reach the waterfall stage, you're feeling a sense of progression. You're going deeper into enemy territory. The snowfield level changes up the aesthetics, White floors, merciless turrets, and soon you're on a moving hangar platform or weaving through bunkers. Each stage is short enough that, with practice, you can blaze through in a minute or two, but the intensity never drops. It's perfectly tailored to keep the adrenaline high, from the second you hit start to the moment you deliver that final blow to the alien threat. Speedrunners and challenge enthusiasts still hold Contra in high regard. You'll find entire communities dedicated to completing it in record time, sometimes on a single life, or even a no-death run using the default 3 lives without the Konami Code. Watching someone do that is mesmerizing, because you realize how tight the controls are and how well crafted the stages can be for a player who memorizes every enemy spawn. Contra was, in some ways, an early forebear of that practice makes perfect ethos that defines speedrunning culture. It also set the tone for many subsequent run-and-gun titles. Games like Super C, Contra 3, the Alien Wars, or even other franchises took cues from its fast-pacing and punishing design. Despite its popularity, Contra wasn't necessarily an immediate bestseller, due in part to the limited distribution and smaller print runs in certain territories. But it found a huge audience over time, largely through word of mouth and that sense of, if you like tough games, you gotta play Contra. Before long, kids everywhere knew about the spread gun, the final alien lair, and that code that gave you 30 lives. The game took on a legendary aura, becoming an essential part of the NES library. If you were serious about action games in the late 80s and early 90s, you had to give Contra a shot. Fittingly, as the NES era drew to a close, Contra and its sequel, Super C, were recognized as 2 of the most intense experiences the console had to offer. Looking at the bigger picture, Contra's success reinforced Konami's reputation as one of the premier developers for Nintendo's system. They already had hits like Castlevania and Gradius, and Contra solidified their run-and-gun credentials, leading them to create more sequels and spin-offs. Though fans often argue that nothing truly beats the purity of the NES original. Even the arcade version, while it looks flashier, lacks the sheer comfort and nostalgia that comes from playing with an NES controller in hand. The console port just feels right. You're on a side-scrolling battlefield, the tunes are blasting, and your muscle memory guides you through a well-worn path of ducks, jumps, and diagonal shots. Today, if you want to revisit Contra, there are plenty of avenues. The original NES cart is a prized possession for many collectors. The Contra Anniversary Collection includes it on modern platforms, letting you recapture that 8-bit vibe with some added convenience features like save states. But for the purest form, a lot of fans prefer the old-school approach. Blow into the cartridge, plug it into your gray box NES, and get ready for that scorching difficulty. Sure, you can pop in the Konami Code if you want, or go hardcore and try to beat it on 3 lives. Either way, it's a journey that can still excite newcomers and thrill veterans who remember every nuance. Does Contra still hold up? That depends on your taste for classic gaming. It's tough and unyielding, so players used to modern conveniences might find it jarring. But the controls remain sharp, the level designs are crisp and purposeful, and the simple premise, run right, shoot everything, has a timeless appeal. If you're playing co-op with a friend, it's as exhilarating now as it was in 1988. There's a reason it keeps showing up on best NES games lists. Something about Contra's direct approach to fun, no frills, no padding, just action and skill, captures what made that era of gaming so special. One aspect often overlooked is the sense of camaraderie the game fosters. Co-op on the NES was usually turn-based, where you'd pass the controller after dying. Contra let you and a friend share the screen, share the enemies, and share the triumphs. Or on it imitate, or more often share the tragic bullet to the face. If you were out of sync, if you scrolled too far ahead, you could doom your partner. But when you nailed that synchronization, blasting turrets in tandem and keeping each other safe, there was no better feeling. My favorite memory is how the final stage's tension skyrocketed with 2 players. We'd remind each other, "Don't lose that spread gun," or "Duck, duck, duck," as bullets whizzed by. There were moments we'd step on each other's toes, physically bumping each other on the couch in excitement, which might cause a slip and a missed jump in-game. But whether we won or lost, the journey always felt epic. There's an old joke that if you can beat Contra on 3 lives, you can do anything. It remains a badge of honor for retro gamers. Sometimes you'll see people post videos of their flawless runs on social media, and the comments are filled with admiration and nostalgia. That's partly why Contra is so revered. It's one of those games that demands skill but never feels cheap. Once you learn the patterns, you see that it's all possible with the right timing and reflexes. So it strikes a sweet spot. It's brutally challenging but not random or unfair. Each death teaches you something, and every victory reaffirms your progress. Culturally, Contra contributed to the mythos of NES Hard, a label used to describe the punishing difficulty many Nintendo games had back then. It also propelled the Konami Code into mainstream gaming culture. Even people who've never played Contra can often recite that code. Over the years, Konami Code references popped up in all kinds of media. T-shirts, websites, comedic sketches. The code was an integral part of the gaming identity in the 80s and 90s, to the point that it still resonates today. Ask any older gamer about up, up, down, down, and watch them grin. When you finally roll credits on Contra, you see your helicopter flying away from the exploding alien base, a triumphant piece of music playing in the background. It's a short ending by modern standards, but it feels momentous after all you've been through. The sense of relief and accomplishment is a hallmark of finishing an NES classic. Some people say that beating Dark Souls or other modern titles gives you that same rush, but for me, there's nothing quite like the 8-bit synergy of difficulty and payoff that Contra delivers. Over 30 years since its release, Contra remains a staple of retro game collections. Younger gamers who discover it often remark on how addictive it is, how every death makes them want to press continue and try again. There's a purity to its design that has aged surprisingly well. It's just you, a weapon, and your reflexes against waves of enemies. No complicated menus, no elaborate backstory, just raw, arcade-perfect gameplay that demands you bring your A-game. And that's part of Contra's enduring charm. For those looking to experience it firsthand, I always recommend grabbing a friend. Sure, you can tackle it solo, but sharing the screen with someone is half the fun. There's a reason people still host retro parties or gaming nights built around co-op Contra marathons. You might laugh, you might curse, you might both run out of lives 10 seconds into a stage because you got cocky. But the process is a blast, forging memories and inside jokes that will likely linger well after you power off the console. If you need a little extra push, go ahead and use the Konami Code. There's no shame in it, especially if you're new to the old school difficulty. But if you want to try the true original experience, skip the code and see how far you can get with just 3 lives. It might be an uphill battle, but with enough practice, you'll start to see the patterns. That turret always appears here. That soldier always spawns from the left. Every inch of the level design becomes a puzzle to solve with bullets and jumps. And once you crack the puzzle, you'll feel like an elite gamer from a bygone era, forging your own war story in pixel form. In the grand tapestry of NES gaming, Contra stands out like a neon sign. It's a testament to Konami's golden age, to the synergy of 2-player action, and to the raw satisfaction of a perfectly executed jump shot that takes down 3 enemies at once. It's a time capsule of everything that made 80s arcade-inspired console games so compelling. A simple premise, a relentless challenge, catchy music, iconic power-ups, and a streak of rebellious high-octane fun that keeps you pressing start again and again. Whether you're discovering it today or revisiting it for the 100th time, Contra for the NES deserves its reputation as one of the best run-and-gun experiences in gaming history. The next time you see that logo flash on your TV screen, crank up the volume, tap in the Konami Code if you need it, and feel the rush of adrenaline as Bill and Lance dash onto the battlefield. In that moment, you're back in the late 80s, taking on an alien invasion with nothing but your reflexes and a dear friend at your side. And if that isn't timeless, I don't know what is. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Contra for the NES. If you've enjoyed this trip back in time, be sure to share your own memories. Were you a spread gun fanatic? Or did you manage to conquer it with the default lives? Did you love or hate the 3D corridor stages? The stories, triumphs, and frustrations are all part of Contra's enduring legend. However you slice it, once you've tasted the run-and-gun rush, there's no turning back. Lace up your boots, watch for stray bullets, and keep that Konami Code in your back pocket. Because in the world of Contra, it's game over before you know it. Embrace the challenge, savor the victory, and remember, if you can beat Contra, you can beat just about anything. Good luck out there, soldier.